So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for April 16th, 2020. We'll follow our agenda, which was as outlined in issue number 848 in the TSE repo. We'll start out with, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, if there's no announcements, let's move on to the issues which were tagged for the issue. There are two under Node.js Node nominating Puz as collaborator. This is 32555. And a second one nominating Juran Narbal as a collaborator. I think those are likely on the agenda as the FYI that we have in our governance.
Yeah, Puz. Oh, go ahead, Anna. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Rich, now we onboarded Puz earlier this week, and Juan will be onboarded tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Anna onboarded them, and I eavesdropped.
Okay, that's great. I guess unless there's anything else on that one, we can move on to the next issues. Okay, so the next one is in the Docker Node repo, but was tagged for TSE discussion. It's 1238 and is around a discussion for dropping Yarn from the Node 14 releases.
I think there's been a robust discussion in the issue since it was added to the agenda, with lots of TSC members participating, and I would encourage people to continue doing that. I'm not sure there's a whole lot for us to do today. I forget who put it on the issue, on the agenda, but I don't really think there's a decision to be made. I think it was just, I think actually Nick Chawning put it on the agenda, but anyway.
Yeah, I think it was the originator of the issue.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we might want to leave it on the agenda just in case it, you know, devolves or peters out, but hopefully the Docker team can make a decision one way or the other in the next week or two, and then that'll be that. But does anybody disagree? Do we need to talk about whether or not the Docker image should include Yarn here?
So that sounds reasonable to me. So we'll leave the agenda tag on in case it peters out or does need some sort of action, but it's not really a TSE necessary decision unless there's, we're specifically, I guess, asked. And there's already input getting in, so just continue that way, right?
Yeah, conversation's active, so let's at least wait for things to definitely, absolutely get to an impasse before injecting ourselves.
Right. Okay, sounds good. On issue, in case an impasse is reached, but does not look like we are there yet. Okay, that sounds good. Unless anybody has any other alternate suggestions or objections. Okay, so if not, let's move on to the next issue. The next one, the TSE Election Chair election for 2020, proposed schedule. I just put that on the agenda as an FYI. The term ends May 30th, so we've got a schedule outlined in the issue, which is like call for nominations April 16th, closing nominations April 30th, open balloting on May 1st, announce results May 15th, have some handover, and complete that by May 30th. This is the same schedule we've used in the past. So really, unless there's questions, that's I think all that I want to do is make sure people are aware of it, know that the nominations will open as of today. Unless people have concerns or other suggestions. Okay, since I don't hear any, let's move on. So the next one, which is tagged as Node Future Directions, any interest in online or in-person summit. I think really the discussion there is still around logistics and whether, we want to, continue to try and work on logistics or, you know, maybe this is the wrong time and we should defer for some number of months. We can continue that discussion in the tracker, although I don't think there really has been any discussion since the last time. Let's see, it's been like maybe 17 days in one issue, and where is the logistics one? Sorry, logistics. Oops. Sorry, I'm looking for the other issue. Okay, right, that one. There hasn't been any discussions since 8 days ago, I guess, and it's sort of 20. So I guess just, is there any, you know, do people think that we should be starting to continue to push on this, or maybe just defer for a while? Any thoughts?
I would probably, I don't know, I'd maybe take a vote or something on whether people want to do it on the issue, and then we can go from there. Because right now, obviously, we have some sort of topics and agreements and stuff, but it not a lot of forward movement. So maybe just having a vote of people actually like expressing whether they want to do this or not would help us understand if we need to continue pushing on it or not.
Okay. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll put in Michael to add a few options, and then we can ask TSE to comment on that list. So I'll include, like, you know, let's put it on the back burner for 3 months. Let's possibly try and align it with the Collaboration Summit. Not do it at all. Anyway, I'll add in some concrete options and then ask for TSE input, and maybe that'll help us move forward. Okay, the next one is Node.js.admin, install GitHub DCO app for use in CI config Travis and CI config GitHub Actions repos. So those are 2 repos which we've newly added. And as part of that, I'd like to try out the DCO bot. I don't know if we have any governance covering how we request adding in new GitHub apps. So I raised an issue in the admin repo, and it's really here on the agenda as a FYI.
Yeah, raising it in the admin repo seems like the correct thing to do.
And I mean, in terms of like opening repos, we have, like, if there's no objections within some sort of time, we agree to just move forward.
Yeah, 72 hours seems to be our standard. So if you did that, then that's probably perfectly adequate.
I guess separately, we might want to write that down in terms of like, how do you ask for an app to be installed?
Yeah, there's a GitHub management policy doc in the admin repo that may already actually cover this, but if it doesn't, we can certainly add a sentence or 2. Yeah,
I don't remember, but yeah, I'll take a look at adding a sentence. Okay. On agenda for FYI. So does anybody have any objections with this to this proceeding? If there are no objections in that issue within 74 hours?
I'm looking for a thumbs up emoji, but I'm not seeing it, so I'm saying it instead.
I'll just say we agreed it's okay to proceed if there's no objections within the next 72 hours. Okay, so that takes us, that is the list of things that were actually tagged for the issues. We have a number of strategic initiative updates in the issue itself. So thank you everybody who put those in. It's great to have those documented in advance.
If you want to read through them, I think that would be okay. It's up to you.
I guess, like, you know, maybe as opposed to me reading through it, is there anything, Michael, you want to highlight on the V8 currency side?
Yes, so the second point about V8 8.3, which maybe Anna can add something about too. It may have ABI breaking changes that would be difficult to backport to or to backport in a non-breaking way to v14.x. So maybe it's important that we do that now before 14.0 is released, and that's a small time frame. So I don't know how we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I will try to do my best to open a PR against 14.x staging. That makes our copy of V8 in 14.x as compatible with V8 master as possible. I think that's what we've done in the past, and I don't think it's going to be an issue like timing wise.
So that PR, is that to land 8.3, or is that just to try and change some of the APIs so they'll be compatible with 8.3?
It is the latter.
Okay. So yeah, okay. So it's a much smaller number of changes than it would be if we tried to yeah, that makes more sense to me.
Okay,
How big do you think it is?
The question, I guess, is everyone here okay that we somehow fast track this compatibility patch into 14?
I guess, Bethany, from your perspective on the releases, are there concerns?
I can pull it in if it's there. I want to kick off builds very early on Tuesday so that they're ready by the afternoon. But if the patch is available and there's no objections, I can pull it in and integrate the 14 release.
How big, Anna, do you think the patch is going to be? Is it? I'm just, I know it's hard to say, but
I mean, there's a decent number of API breaking changes, and it's hard to tell how big the patch is going to be because so in the past what we've done is like for some of these changes we have just backported the V8 commits that led to these changes being made. That usually came with some other changes attached. It's not an issue, but it makes the diff large. Or we have really just tried to only do surface layer modifications to the API itself. That results in pretty small patches. And so like it's going to be a mixture of these, and it's yeah, hard to tell. I guess it's about as large as previous API patches that we have made in this kind of situation. If you want to take a look at them.
okay. So, and we've done those like right before the release as well and haven't run into problems.
I think usually we've done it a bit earlier, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would chime in here, like as someone who's helped with a bunch of the V8 stuff before, like the bigger concern that I would have with this would not be like support or stability or like anything like that. It would be much more along the lines of like, do we actually have time to get this done? You know, like, and if Anna's committing to the time to doing it, then I think that it's definitely prudent to move forward with it. Like my bigger concern would be like, I wouldn't want to like say, hey, we're going to do this and no one actually has the time. But with Anna so enthusiastically saying she's up for the task, I think
it's going to save me a lot of work later.
But I think that that's actually a really important part because like, especially for the lifetime of 14, if we want to have the most modern version of Node, like I think, I'm trying to remember how many versions ahead, but we've done multiple versions ahead in the past. I think that it was for 12 to ensure ABI compatibility as far forward as possible. So I see no concerns with it personally.
Okay, does anybody have any concerns? I want to raise now. I guess if the patch ends up being huge, people can review that as well and comment at that point. But
yeah, and I can ping the V8 team and see if anyone there has bandwidth to chime in if they have concerns. This is somewhat unrelated and not a topic that we should dig into, but if people have time and I could see if I can find some time, I'd really love us to like look back into ABI validation tools. I know we had like some really sketchy ways of trying to do it with Sitgim, but I think especially kind of moving forward for other updates on this branch, if we had some sort of way of programmatically verifying the ABI compatibility, that would make me extremely happy.
Okay, Michael, anything else you wanted to highlight on this one?
Nope.
Okay, I don't think we have James, but he posted a quick update. I guess he's looking at whether he could do some sort of implementation in an add-on, but it doesn't look trivial. That's more of a backup plan. Any questions, discussion on that one before we move on? In terms of the build resources initiative, then I just had an update that we are exploring options of hiring resources to help with some parts of the work, focusing today on urgent problems that get in the way of collaborators. I've got some feedback from the most active build workgroup members, and there's the foundation has suggested a particular vendor, so we're working with them to take that and say, given the scope, what would it cost, and get some feedback to see if that's going to be a reasonable option or not. Any questions on that one? I guess the next one, anything you wanted to highlight on the modules update? Miles?
Yeah, not a ton here. Modules continues to get more stable. The 12.x line is up to date with 13, aside from a single change that just landed in 13.3 that I'm actually in the process of backporting and testing during this meeting. The discussion has moved to the point of I don't think that we're going to be able to reach consensus and get the warning removed in time for 14.0.0, which I believe is due for next Tuesday. But I think we're kind of at the point where we want to remove the warning pretty soon in the 14 release line, and that's on the agenda for us to discuss in the next modules team meeting. I think we're all still pretty close to agreement that we want to remove the flag in 12.17, although we do not yet have consensus about whether or not we want to remove the warnings from LTS yet. And so that's part of kind of the discussion that we're at. I'm pretty excited, though, to report that the discussion that we're at is like along stability index, and the majority of changes that are coming in are really fairly subtle and mostly around edge cases and improving errors and warnings.
Okay, any questions before we move on to the next one? Okay, I think the last one that we have somebody for here is core promise APIs. I don't know, Mateo, if there's any update or anything to say on that one this week.
No, I don't. There's nothing really to be concerned about there at this point. It's I think there's nothing new or major being added. So there is still some work in stabilizing, I think, the async iterator stuff on streams. And then, there's some more overarching question around other big APIs like HTTP or anything that are probably worthwhile thinking in a separate manner. So
right.
I don't know if there is anything. I don't think there should be plans to add more, to be honest. So we might as well. I think we have covered most of the cases. So minus HTTP. So that's
Okay.
at least my read of it. So we might even think about dropping it in the future, unless there is some more activity. There is a few things that we might want to do still, but I don't know if there is much attention. So
yeah, I guess it's two different aspects. Like one, if we don't have people who have cycles to do it, or are we at the point where we're like, the APIs don't need to have, be promisified. Those are kind of two different statements, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. So it'd be interesting to see, like, anyway, to understand whether it's I think you might have been saying that we're getting close to having the promise-based APIs that we need, right? Versus not having people to do it, or am I?
Well, what the point is that is there something that we feel it's that is really missing, okay, on this, and there's been a few additions. There's been a few things. There is modules that have not been really made promise aware or promise capable, but should they? Like there is a big, there's a question: should we put in the effort to create promise-based API for DNS, for example? I don't know. Like those are questions that are totally valid. There might be something to be done on zlib or something like that, but again, it's more about, like, this is kind of a question for everybody. Do you think that, are you lacking certain level of promise-based APIs that you might be willing to use? Would you like them to exist? I don't know. This is a question for all of you. So if there's an opinion, we can talk about it. Then
I can chime in really quickly, Matteo, just with like 2 quick bits here. So I think for some of the things where I wanted more promise-based APIs, the changes that you did for streams and making them able to work with async iterators actually made a huge advantage to that, but did also create this weird scenario where I use the promise-based APIs where I have to explicitly import or require promises for the ones in which I'm awaiting, but I'm still using the non-promise-based APIs for the ones that I await. So it might make sense to make like pass-through promise APIs for the stream APIs, just so there can be a somewhat similar interface.
You mean for fs.promises, right?
Well, there's fs promises, but then like for all the stream APIs, I'm not grabbing it from promises.
You are grabbing it. You are specifically talking about create read stream and create write stream. Okay, sorry.
Yes, exactly.
You're specifically talking about those two. Yeah, that's easy to be added. Yeah, you can probably just come together.
Okay, Anna has her hand up as well.
Yeah, I've had for a while, but like, don't let that interrupt this discussion. Just like after we're done with the promises talk.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So that was one, and then I guess the other thing that I think is kind of similar to the Promise API, but is just a different discussion to come up, is how some of our APIs don't exactly work as nicely in the module goal now. And I think it's a similar discussion because it's about modernizing our APIs. And so I mentioned that just to say, like, perhaps it might be worth stepping back and reevaluating the goal to being, rather than promisifying the APIs, to a broader goal of modernizing the APIs. Because when we don't have things like file name or dir name, but we're using something like import meta URL, which is giving file URLs, you have to do a little bit more of a song and dance to get things together. Anyways, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I just wanted to bring that up as an example of why we may want to reframe the goal here. Especially, Matteo, if you think maybe we're getting to a point where we've got a lot of the promised APIs figured out, I still think that there's a story.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you, Miles. It's just that I think the core bits were, like, for me, were done. So that was my point of view, at least right now. So
yeah, and so I guess, like, the only pushback is they might be done for promises, but I don't think they're done for like a modern evaluation of our API surface.
Oh yeah, totally. On that, I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that was certainly one of the, I think, the topics we had for like the next 10 years of Node, but I think that the way Miles has just cast it is, let's look at the APIs and what needs to be doing going forward, as opposed to just the one focus on promises. There may be other things as well. Okay. I guess anything, if we're finished that one, Anna had her hand up because she wanted to bring something else up.
So I basically only had my hand up to mention that while Joya isn't here for the meeting, as far as I can tell, somebody mentioned in the TSE meeting issue, and I think it's worth mentioning here too for the startup performance test, that I do have a PR open for including more data in the startup snapshot by default. And I think it's safe to say that like Joy and I have different opinions about that PR, and those who are somewhat familiar with C++ have the cycles to take a look at that pull request. I think that would be appreciated.
You have the number? I can paste it into the.
Sure. Yeah, it's 32761. I'm going to paste it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, some discussion. Okay, any other things on that? Anything else you want to, just that, Anna?
Yep, just that.
Okay. So that takes us to the end of the list. Is there anything else that people would like to talk about before we close out for today? Let me just promote Ruben here so he has a chance to. Ruben, sorry, I didn't notice to promote you earlier. Is there anything you think we should talk about before we close out today?
Not really. Sorry, I was not able to join earlier.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so thanks to everybody for coming today and those on the live stream. And talk to everybody in GitHub and later on. Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
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 Bye.